It's a beautiful sunny day here in Bristol, and I'm going to do a video about how to replace these rubber seals on the rear light. I'm going to show you what happens if you don't do that. I'm going to show you where to actually get these lenses from if you have a cracked lens, how to completely disassemble and refurbish each tiny part without breaking them, and how to put the whole thing back together. Now, this is quite an extreme example, but let me just show you what happens to these cars if you let them leak through the rear lights and you don't address the problem. Now this car is pretty much gone, but you can see it is completely rusted away where water has got into the boot, and hopefully you won't have a car quite as rusty as this. If you've got one of these lovely 107 SLs and you've never replaced these seals, it really is worth seeing what the state of your light is like. So have a go at taking it out and just have a look at what the state of the reflectors are like, what the threads and everything else are on there like, because if you leave it too long without changing that seal and without disassembling the light, you will find it incredibly difficult at a later date to actually disassemble the light. These lights can get extremely corroded like this here. All of these fittings have broken off. And these particular nuts are not coming off at all, so we're going to show an alternative method to get these off. The seals, once you've taken one of these lights out, will almost certainly need replacing, and they're quite expensive, and the actual alloy or aluminium casing of the light, which is this thing here, will need cleaning, thoroughly cleaning, before you put the new seal on. Now, it is extremely easy to break these lights if you don't know what you're doing. And there's two things that are very easy to break, which one of them is this fitting here. This fitting should be one complete fitting like that, but somebody's forced it when they've taken it off previously and snapped it in half. If you've taken your light off and you can see this situation here, and when you get a spanner on there, these things are tight. First of all, make sure, take a really good look and make sure that the whole thing isn't turning when you try and get that nut off. If it is, it means you're about to crack this plastic here, and these lenses are very expensive, and once you crack that, that'll just turn in there, so you want to avoid cracking that if at all possible. Now you can try soaking these nuts and bolts in your favorite penetrating fluid for days, and you might be lucky, which we have been on these two, that eventually they got free without cracking the plastic. But these two nuts here are not coming off at all. Now the problem you've got is you can't use heat on here, because if you try and get a blowtorch on here, you'll melt the casing here and you'll probably end up melting this plastic as well. So we are going to very carefully try and cut and drill these nuts off. The other thing you're going to be faced with, I'll show you on this one here, is that very often these studs here just snap off. They should be 22mm long, but they'll just snap off when you try to get them out. And what you're going to have to do is drill them out, which we've done here, and then tap new threads in there, glue a bolt in there, and then cut the head of the bolt off, and we'll show you how to do that as well. You are going to attempt this job. It's as well to get the bits and pieces you're going to need beforehand. If you're lucky, you will have, I believe, 5 of these on the car. And these are the special washers that clamp the light to the car. Often, as you can see in this case, they're completely rusted away or they're missing. So you can buy these from the SL shop. They're quite expensive, or you can make up your own, which is what we're going to be doing, and I'll show you how to do that. These will need an M5 washer on top of them, like so, before you put that on. And we'll also be using new M5 nuts. That's for these fittings here. And then we'll be using new M6 nuts. Those are these fittings here. And then we'll be using new serrated washers, which are these washers here. And they haven't arrived yet, but they'll come from a company called Bolt Base. To replace these studs, we're going to be using M5 25mm roofing bolts. And then we're just going to cut the heads off and glue them in there using some JB Weld. For respraying the inside of those chrome lenses, which you'll almost certainly need it, Bosnia chrome paint is what we've used previously, and that gives a really nice finish. You also need a new set of seals, and I'll tell you the cheapest place to get those. And once you've taken this, disassembled this, you will almost certainly need to clean all of this casing here. What you can use is either a brass wheel in a drill, or you can use these here as well. They work really well. Now previously I've used a lemon juice bath to get all this corrosion off, but since then I've discovered the joys of the Dremel tool, and you can get these tiny little fittings on Amazon really cheaply. I'll leave you a link to where you can get them, and what these basically allow you to do is to get into all of these really difficult spaces which you can't use a larger drill bit for. So these tiny little fittings will allow you to get rid of all the corrosion on here without having to resort to putting this in any kind of bath to get rid of that corrosion. Now, just before you cut that off or attempt to drill it off, there's one other method you can use. You can put two nuts on top here and try and lock them together, and then that will allow you to hold the stud. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be attempting to tighten with the top spanner and loosen with the bottom one, being really careful that that stud is not going to move. And if you find you get any movement at all, you manage to break the rust, then what you can do is just tie a bit more penetrating fluid in there. I think that is actually moving. This is the first time for everything. If you try and rush this, you will just end up cracking the plastic and cursing yourself. That has taken a ridiculous amount of time to get this nut off, but I think we're just about there. This nut's not coming off, and we're going to try and use the Dremel tool with a cut-off wheel to try and cut that nut off. It's got to be very careful not to damage the threads. So we've cut off the first part of that nut. It's not helped loosen it at all. I think what we've got to do now is cut off another part and hope that we can just chip that off, but we've got to be so careful that we don't damage these threads or this fitting underneath. It's been a real battle getting this nut off. Finally we can take that off. My goodness me, that was a battle to get that off. That was just totally, utterly rusted on. So we should now be able to get this whole fitting here off, and then we should be able to just recut the threads there. Even with all these nuts off, this doesn't want to separate, so I'm just carefully taking the seal out. Eventually you should just be able to pry this off. Next up, we need to try and get this piece here and this piece here out intact. And these fittings that hold that down are like cup washers with a fabric or some kind of rubber fitting inside there, so we have to pry those up very gently without breaking them. These are no longer available, these fittings, so if we can retrieve them without breaking them, that'll be useful. They're really rusted. It's quite difficult to see what you're doing. You have to kind of dig these bits of washer or gasket out. And we're gonna just try and leave this up. There is some movement there. There's that fitting there, pretty rusty. It is incredibly easy to snap this fitting in half when you take it off. You have to unwedge it from this side first, and then it'll just lift straight off like so. And that's actually not in too bad condition at all. We've got this little metal plate as well. We'll probably just put that in a little rust bath and repaint that. We're just going to pop these rusty bits here in a rust bath, the built Hamber DOC 19:1 ratio, and we'll probably get ourselves an ice cream afterwards by the sound of it. While those are soaking away in the rust bath, we're just going to use an M6 1 thread cutter to cut all these, recut all these M6 threads, get rid of all the rust and make them nice and neat again. Have to cut the threads all the way down to the bottom. Just arrived from America. Our seals from this company here, Euro Parts, also known as Auto Technica. This company has an enormous catalogue of parts for the 107 SL. We're going to be using them for the deck seal, for the A-pillar seals, for the door seals, and obviously for the rear light seals as well. Little known fact that you can actually get the lights from these guys as well. Now these lights are massively expensive if you get them from Mercedes, and you've seen how long it takes to actually restore one of these and put it back together. Okay, and if you happen to have a cracked lens, which we do on this car, you don't really have any choice other than to get whole new lights. I'll be leaving you a link to where you can get these parts from. You can't buy directly from Euro if you're a retailer. If you're a wholesaler, if you're a garage watching this and you're doing restoration work or just repair work on an SL, do bear these guys in mind. But I'll also leave you a link where you can get parts relatively cheaply, whether you're in Europe or the US. Now, if you are replacing one of your broken lenses with either a Mercedes one or a Euro one, it comes with all these parts that you get when you separate this bit from the actual car, but you will still need to clean up this part, repair any of the broken or missing studs prior to putting on any of the new seals. Eventually, after going over the frame here with a drill and then with a Dremel tool to get inside all of there, you'll have this in a nice clean state. All the corrosion is gone off it. We still need to glue in some studs in here and drill that one out, and then we'll be ready to put the new seals on. When you come to drill out these fittings, turn the thing upside down, because the back of these screws have got a hole in them, which makes it much easier to center the drill, and then use a bench drill so that you get the hole straight down. I'm just putting these two nuts on here so I can exactly cut off the bolt to the right length, and just screwing a 4.5mm hole in this table here, which will hold the bolt nice and firm. If you need to re-tap those holes, cut new threads, you want an M508. Last thing we've got to do is just mix up a little bit of JB Weld to glue those studs in. You could of course also just use thread lock to lock those studs in place. You need the thread lock that's designed not to come undone to do that. These have come out the rust bath and all the rust has gone off them. We're just going to go over them with a brass wire wheel, bring the shine back up, and then go over them with some MRO chrome galvanizing paint. This stuff gives a great finish and a great coating, kind of etches its way on and acts as a primer. But the one bit of advice I would give you, it's very easy to get runs when you're spraying this, especially if you try and spray a heavy coat or you're holding the aerosol too close to the workpiece. So hold it back from the workpiece and very, very light dustings. These little cup washers have been sitting in a rust bath where these were really, really rusted. They've come out black, and we'll see if we can tidy those up. These are all pretty much cleaned up now. We're just going to give them a quick dusting coat of that MRO. Now, if you had some paper clips, you could just open up the paper clips, make little hooks, hang these up, and just spray them on the washing line. But unfortunately, since having children, things like paper clips seem to disappear, so I'm going to do it just with some little tacks. We're going to make up some of these special washers which hold the rear lights against the car. To do it, we're going to use this leftover bracket which we used to make a puller for the rear boot hinges. You can save yourself a few cuts just by putting this on the corner like that. We finished making up those lens fixing mounts out of one of these heavy duty brackets, and these are still available from the SL shop, but they're about £4.46 each, so we've saved ourselves quite a bit of money there. Depending on the state of your lenses, you're going to probably want to respray them, and we're going to use the Bosnia chrome paint to respray this one. This lens is pretty much okay actually. You may be exceptionally lucky when you take your seal off and it may be reusable, but the SLs, the 107 SLs, a very common source of leaking is through that rear seal. You can see why the metal starts to corrode and the seal is no longer sealing. This is what we're going to need for this particular video. The seals for the lights. Now you can get these from Mercedes, they're super duper expensive, but we've always used Euro for seals. They're a fraction of the price, and certainly in my lifetime they've done particularly well. It's not important to get this absolutely shiny when you clean it. The most important thing is to get all the corrosion off the edges where the seal is going to sit. There's no point in putting a new seal on there if you're actually putting it on top of a non-flat or corroded surface. So we have cleaned that up nicely. We're going to give it a quick dusting over with the chrome galvanized coating. We'll just stop it tarnishing and corroding in the future. The way to put this seal on is put it on the frame first, and it's pretty self-explanatory how that all clips on. The only slight thing you need to be aware of is when you come to put this piece on, that you tuck these corners in. We're now ready to reassemble this light. The first thing that happens is the lenses clip on. Make sure that this is clipped on underneath here and they're all seated properly. And the next thing that happens is these newly refurbished cup washers will slot on. There's 4 of them. And then on top of the cup washers, we're going to be putting some of these little rubber O-rings. Now originally there would have been fibre washers, but they're no longer available. These little rubber O-rings just come in a kit of assorted O-rings from Toolstation. Once you've made sure that those O-rings are seated on there, you can now put on the casing and the seal. Now make sure you've put the seal on properly, there are no gaps, you've checked, double checked and checked again that everything is fitting snugly, and then that should just fit right over there like so. Next up, just arrived from Bolt Base, I hope, are the serrated lock washers. There are 2 types of those lock washers you can get from Bolt Base. Make sure you get the right ones, not the serrated ones, but the ones with little gaps in. Once you've got those on, you can put the nuts on. Now this next bit is very, very important. When you put the nuts on, do not over tighten the nuts. Make sure you've recut the threads so the nuts go on nice and easily. And when you tighten them by hand or with a handheld spanner and not with a socket, because you will crack the plastic. And then tighten them in a criss-cross pattern as well. Make sure when you're putting this seal on that it's properly tucked in all the way around, otherwise you will have leaks. You may well find that when it comes to getting the light in, that now that you've got a new seal on there, it is an extremely tight, snug fit. In fact, this particular light doesn't want to go in at all. So I'm just going to take it out and just put a little bit of lube on the rubber seal around the top here. Remember, once you've fitted the light, this flat washer is going to go on first. Then you're going to have a little 5mm washer, and then you're going to have a nut on top of that. It's important that that screw there goes all the way to the edge, otherwise you will have a gap around there. Now the reasons for these flat washers in the first place is that these fittings need to be quite tight to pull the light in to ensure there's no gaps on the seal. For example, this light here still has a small gap running along there. Now we're not going to tighten that up now, we're just going to leave it overnight and let things settle in a little bit, because I don't want to risk snapping any nuts off, but these need to be a little bit tighter. Similarly here, this just a tiny little gap here just needs to be pulled in a little bit tighter. I'm going to leave the video here and just leave links to where you can get the lenses and the seals from, and all the fixtures and fittings that you'll need. It's worth having a look at the Europarts catalogue to see what parts might be available for your SL. The URL is apaindustries.com/catalogue, and you're going to put in Mercedes-Benz. They do have various parts for 190 SLs, but I normally just go down to the 450 SL, which I think is the largest range that they have. They also have a 380 SL, but if you put in 450 SL, you will find a huge range of parts. Over here you'll have the Mercedes part number. Now you won't be able to buy directly from these, as I mentioned, unless you're a wholesaler, but you can go to this website here, rockauto.com. They are based in America, but they do ship to Europe. You just need to scroll down to Mercedes-Benz and then put in the year of the car. So we're doing, say, a 79 at the moment. and you'll find a 450 SL, and then you'll find all the parts here. These are the tail light seals from Rock Auto, £24.27, but you will obviously have to pay postage and possibly customs and import duty as well. So just before you get too excited, if you're in the UK, bear in mind that there are extra charges on top of that. If you're in the UK or Europe, you can go to the SL shop to get your tail light seals and lenses. As I mentioned, they are not cheap. These cheaper seals here, they will be Euro ones, I believe, and the premium ones, I think, will be Mercedes ones. It's always worth checking with Mercedes to see if they sell these parts cheaper. The MRO chrome galvanized paint, the packaging has changed slightly, is we got from these guys here, mosseurope.co.uk. Once again, if you're in America, you can get this stuff an awful lot cheaper, £17.60 a can. Cheapest place I've found for those serrated washers is Bolt Base on Amazon, just £1.64 with free postage. Well, these chrome spray paints are pretty much of a muchness. We've used the Bosny stuff before, bosnyspraypaints.co.uk, and that gives a pretty good finish. It's not a chrome mirror finish, but it's better than some of the other paints that we've used.